Hey guys, my name is Sarah. I work in our customer growth and sustainability teams here at Eco-Enclose, and today we are going to talk about polymailers and printing our inline polymailers at Eco-Enclose. So polymailers are probably one of the most common packaging items in e-commerce. Whenever you order something online, there's a really good chance that it's coming to you in a polymailer. At Eco-Enclose, we make our polymailers with 100% recycled content and 50% post-consumer waste. Those are all produced here in the USA, and we're using recycled content that comes from domestic recycling streams as well. When it comes to polymailers, it's important to understand how they're made so that you can better understand the printing capabilities and how to proof them out correctly and design them so that they're meeting all of your goals and expectations for mailers. When polymailers are created, we start with a huge batch of what we call film. And that film material is what creates the backbone of the polymailer itself. To produce polymailers like our Eco-Enclose stock mailers like this, we purchase and procure a minimum amount of film, of recycled film. And that minimum amount of recycled film is what helps us determine what an MOQ, or a minimum order quantity, is for either an inline print or our in-house post-production printing processes. So when we create polymailers, we start with a lot of film. It is then put through different converting machines, and in this form, this is LDPE. In this form, it runs through the machine at extremely high speeds and really dialed in printing capabilities. So I've actually cut this polymailer up so you can see the full length of it. When polymailers are being produced, they are all flat. So they are flat in this film form, printed, and then converted into an actual mailer. And when that happens, this is cut a lot better than I've cut it and sealed along the sides. And so that's how you get this final polymailer shape. But it's important to understand that it all prints flat before it's converted into a polymailer. Because it all prints flat, we tend to push for what's called a flexographic print. At Eco-Enclose, all of our polymailers are printed in a flexographic printing method. Flexo is a type of printing process that basically takes a huge stamp or a printing plate and lays down one color of ink at a time. So on these machines, we're often running thousands or millions a day. And those printing processes are super dialed in. Those plates are very large and incredibly detail oriented. And for each mailer that's printed, this blue color took up one printing plate. And so when polymailers are being produced, they all require a flexographic printing plate in order to lay down one color. So based on how that production process happens, we have two options for how we can print onto these mailers. So we offer what's called a post-production print for our low volume customers and for folks who want to run smaller amounts of polymailers at a time. The minimum order quantity there is between 500 and 1,000 units. So here's an example of one of our post-production prints. Because we are post-production printing this mailer is one of our Eco-Enclose stock mailers. So it's already been produced through that major production process and then comes to us in our print house, and we apply this print on a very small printing plate. And so the printing area is a lot smaller on this one than it is on these inline printed mailers. We're able to print at these low MOQs of 500 to 1,000 units because we're using a small printing plate and because these mailers have already been produced. Okay, I'll stop it there. There are a ton of ways that you can make sure your polymailers work towards your efficiency and sustainability goals. So in logistics, a lot of times we are trying to meet an efficiency target or get out a very specific throughput of our orders from our distribution center or a 3PL that we're working with or in-house. And so there are a couple of different ways that we recommend really customizing your inline poly mailers if you are opting to go down that route. So the first thing that I'll note is all of our mailers automatically come with 2 seals on them. We call this a dual seal. And the reason for that is because many customers will often need to return their packaging, or return their product to you if it's not the right size, or just not what they're looking for. And so having a dual seal really allows that customer to just reuse the poly mailer that you already sent them, send it back to you without having to worry about finding new packaging. So the dual seal is really helpful in terms of returns and any rental business models that you may have. A few other things that really help in terms of reducing plastic, both for sustainability, but also reducing the gross material used for your mailers, is down gauging, is what we call down gauging. And so our stock poly mailers are 2.5 mil in thickness. You can change that mil thickness based on your needs. And so 2.5 mil tends to be a very robust and strong poly mailer, but we have seen companies go all the way down to 1.75, 1.8 mil. And what that means is a very, very small difference in thickness of that poly. However, at scale and at volume, if you're running 1 million mailers, changing the thickness of the mailer by 5%, 10% plays a really big role in terms of cost, materials that you're using, and plastic used on the front end if it's not recycled, as well as weight of that mailer and the implications of weight in terms of shipping costs and shipping rates from your manufacturers to you. And so play around with mil thickness and talk to your packaging provider or Eco-Enclose about using that thickness of your mailer to reach some more goals. For efficiency, there are a few other things that can be done. For faster fulfillment, you can add what are called wickets into your poly mailer. And so a wicket is, imagine 2 holes right here and a band that keeps about 50 to 100 mailers all together and in place. And so what you would do in that case is typically wicket holders stand up straight. You can fill the poly mailer with your product without having to use your hands like I am. Fill it with your product and then pull it off of the wicket and then seal it and go. Adding wickets can really reduce the amount of time that your team is needing to fill a poly mailer and get it out the door. So wickets are a really great option. Another option would be if you're working with a fulfillment center or your own warehouse or DC uses autobaggers. Autobaggers are just automated filling, packing, and shipping machines. And so here's an example of an auto mailer that we did for SandCloud. Using an auto mailer, we can create these and you can work with your packaging provider if you've got the machinery already at your fulfillment center. But using auto bags allows for super fast fulfillment because a lot of times either a person is just filling this as it's going down a line and then a shipping label is printed here, which saves on shipping label cost and paper use. And then it is automatically sealed by the machine and sent out into the mail. Auto baggers really reduce the amount of time needed to fulfill and process orders. So they're a really, really great option. Another thing that we have encouraged our customers to use as more and more folks are using QR codes in day-to-day life is printing them onto your packaging. And this example, again, for SandCloud, has what we call an eco report, a QR code right here that folks can scan, and that will take them to a page that shows them exactly the amount of sustainability savings that this packaging has saved because of using recycled content, being made in the USA, and other choices like using a specific kind of ink or higher amounts of post-consumer waste. And so QR codes are a really great way to talk directly to your customer about the sustainability choices you've made without necessarily printing all of those decisions onto the mailer. Another great option, if you are working with a specific shipping carrier like UPS or FedEx or DHL, among many others, they may have very specific dimensional requirements for your packaging to hit certain shipping rates that are more affordable for your customers and for you. Something that you can do when you're working on an inline poly mailer project is specify the exact size that you need. So most of our poly mailers come in a set size between 6 by 9 inches all the way up to 24 by 24 inches. We have several set sizes that are optimized for shipping rates currently, but it may be a situation where your provider gives you a discount or an incentive to reduce the size of your poly mailer. That was the situation with our customer Tom Bolo. They make really incredible apparel and they also design awesome packaging, clearly. They realized that their carrier would prefer if they had a 13 by 17 sized poly mailer, and they were going to use a 14.5 by 19. So what we did was we changed the size of the mailer, and by doing that, they reduced their shipping rates for their customers and for them. All right, so like I had shown before, this is typically how a poly mailer will print. It'll be flat, the film will be flat, and one printing plate in this case, because there's only one color being printed on top of this background white color, one printing plate is going to go down and lay down all of this blue color. And so this internal print right here is going to cover one printing plate, and then the edges here, you'll notice that the edges are also printed, and so this would require an additional plate. And that is because the typical printing plate is about this thick, and so to make sure that these edges are printed, we create another printing plate that just covers these areas and makes sure that these edges match this internal color. And so there are a couple of different printing options when it comes to poly mailers. We focus on flexographic printing, and that is a big printing plate laying down one color of ink at a time. We can print up to 7 Pantone colors or PMS colors on these films as they're running in line. Another type of printing that we often see in the marketplace is called digital printing. It's the same exact technology as what is used on your LaserJet or inkjet printer at home. And so digital printing is able to print super quickly and without these really big setup costs for printing plates. But sort of the downside of digital printing is that because it relies on the same printing speed for every type of mailer, regardless of quantity, there is not a great option for scaling down the individual per unit cost. And so we tend to see that digitally printed mailers do not have a great scaled cost as volumes increase, whereas a flexographic printed mailer definitely reduces in cost as volume increases, whereas digital sort of peters off and maxes out at a specific quantity. So on our poly mailers, we can print up to 7 PMS colors. This one has 1 PMS color. This also has 1. This is more of a shade, but I believe still has either 1 or 2 printing plates for this, 3, because we've got this color, and this color, as well as printed edges. So this company, Happy Box Store, really took this entire poly mailer to use as their canvas, and it looks super cool having this different fade in the color going from a sort of cool pink over to warm pink here. So that's a really, really great example of using, packaging as an awesome marketing material. And then over here, something to note, we talked about before, the printed edges require a different printing plate. And so this Warm and Wonderful, they created this really awesome poly mailer. This design is really critical to their brand, and it looks really awesome on this mailer. I wish that I got one at my house. And you'll notice that this design is covering the majority of the mailer, but it cuts off right here at the edge. And so that's where we would say if you want a printed edge, just one color, you can use one print seam plate, or a seam plate will cover both of these edges. If you wanted to expand this pattern all the way to the edge, it is possible, but it requires a much more complex piece of equipment and a much more complex printing plate. And so that's what's called a circular or cylindrical plate, and that will print an actual pattern, but it is quite expensive and requires a lot more technology. So these are all examples of Pantone printed polymailers. And so for these, an individual color is applied with each printing plate. Another option that we do offer, if it is required for your brand or something that you really want to try, is a 4-color process print. And here's an example. So Tombolo chose to put down one background color, this cream light color is their background PMS, and then on top of it printed a 4-color process is what's called, to make sure that they're getting all these different colors, the different shades, the patterns here. They printed what's called 4-color process, and that 4-color process is also called CMYK. It's the same concept as using the 4 different ink cartridges in your printer, but instead it's using 4 different printing plates, each with very, very, very small amounts of either cyan, yellow, magenta, or key, which is black. And so you can produce this really incredible print with a 4-color process flexographic print. And they really went all out on these. I think they're just super, super cool. But generally speaking, we can do individual Pantone colors, and we can do a 4-color process also with flexographic. When it comes to proofing your print, there are 2 things that we always recommend you look out for, and they have to do with the printing process and how the converting after it is a flat film into a polymailer happens. And so the first one we always like to call out is this edge right here. So as this is printed fully flat, this verbiage can move a very, very small amount, and that's just based on the tolerance, that print tolerance. Often we see it's between, 1/4 of an inch and 1/2 an inch at its very furthest possible amount. And so if this verbiage is moving at all like this, and then when it's converted and folded, if there is a tolerance and it ends up like this, that is not ideal. That's not what we want. So we want to make sure that if we are printing down at the bottom of the mailer, that it's at least a 1/2 inch away from where we anticipate this edge will be, just so that you're not ending up with any of your important branding sort of hidden or halfway folded over the mailer. So that's one. The second one is mostly relevant when it comes to sealing your mailer. And so this type of print is super beautiful, so we probably wouldn't be closing the mailer over it. But when we do seal these mailers, you'll notice that we keep this part empty of print. The reason for that is that increases the effectiveness of the adhesive. This adhesive tends to hold super, super well to more or areas that are less covered in ink. And so you can test this out on your own polymailers as well. But this is a really, really strong seal here without any ink. Whereas if I was going to seal this on top of ink, it can be less strong. And so when you are designing your mailers and you're picking your size, definitely put time into determining what the best size of mailer is. If you find that you're using a 9x12 mailer, but most of your shipments are this big and you're folding over, that's first not a really great use of material, and you could probably reduce that size and save some money and on sustainability as well. But also, you want to think about where is this being sealed and instruct your team and your 3PL to really focus on sealing it on this blank space. So once you've determined what polymailer size is best for you, you've gone through the process of designing the die line of your mailer, and you're ready to get an order in and to get these printed. What we're going to have to go through before we get that first print going is what's called the proofing process. Lots of customers will come to us and ask, can you send me a printed sample of my mailer before I place an order and I approve it and get it moving? The reason that we are not able to do that has to do a lot with this printing process. And so I've mentioned before the MOQ to print at this very, very high capacity is 25,000 units. And because of that setup time, we aren't able to print individual samples just because we need to have those printing plates already in-house, as well as an entire team of people setting it up and making sure that the print is going to run smoothly. And so in place of a printed physical sample, which as a side note, you will typically only see a digitally printed sample. You would never see a flexigraphically printed sample of your design. In place of that physical printed sample, what we do offer are these two options in terms of proofing. And so this is the die line that you're going to create and send to us. So as you can see, it's laid out flat, just the way that that previous mailer was. And on here, we've got all the colors, all of the design. It's super, super important to use this digital proof and look super, super closely and make sure that it looks correct before moving forward. And so the digital proof is what you'll also get when you order on our website to do post-production printed mailers. In addition to a digital proof, our printers can often print out what's called a physical proof in a printout. And so this is just paper, but it shows the same exact PMS and CMYK colors that will be printed on the mailer. And if your team really needs something physical to look at and feel and sort of get really up and close and personal with, a printed sample like this is ideal. And then once these are both approved, then we move forward in the production process and we end up with the final proof. So as you can see, there's nothing like holding a final product in front of you, but this print is identical to what is on here, as well as our digital proofs.